And she said, I thought I could trust you. And the psalmist said, if you, Lord, were to note what is done amiss, O Lord, who could stand? In the name of the Lord who walks with us in the garden in the cool of the evening. Amen. Is there anything more sad than the picture painted in our reading from Genesis this morning? This admittedly anthropomorphic but nonetheless familiar image of God walking in the garden in the cool of the evening, seeking the companionship of his children, only to discover their betrayal instead. Have you perhaps experienced betrayal on this level as a parent, or a teacher, or a guardian, or an employer? Have you been there, and can you sympathize? Can you imagine the heartbreak of watching your presumption of trust or your dream of goodness and achievement ruined by the awful daring of a moment's surrender that an age of prudence can never retract? Words borrowed from T.S. Eliot to explain or to enunciate this awful moment of surrender. The awful daring of a moment's surrender that an age of prudence can never retract. Hadn't the child been brought up better? Hadn't the friend been offered more than enough trust? Couldn't they have left that one forbidden thing alone? Couldn't they have understood that it was off limits without actually even being told in so many words? How sad to be the parent, the overseer, the trustee in this story. But do you also know the other side? What it feels like to be exposed, to be naked before someone you disappointed who had trusted you completely? What it feels like in that situation to be, to your core, totally ashamed. Can you see yourself quite clearly in Adam and Eve? They are truly your ancestors, aren't they? They are mine. I can understand, and I imagine that you can understand their immediate pointing of the finger and casting blame elsewhere. It wasn't my fault. We know, don't we, just how strong is that defense mechanism that acts to preserve whatever dignity we have left in that moment of exposure. It's the fig leaf with which we feebly try to cover whatever makes us feel most ashamed. We understand the temptation to make God, or the one who totally trusted us, look elsewhere for some true culprit, because it wasn't me. Or at least, it wasn't all my fault. We have been where we shouldn't have been. We have eaten the forbidden fruit, and yes, we have run for cover. And we have, at least I have, done as much as possible in the moment to get off the hook by blaming or at least pointing to someone else. I can't lay claim to very many truly vivid memories from the first 7 years of my life, but I remember the day my mom went shopping and left me at age 7 with my older brother in the house, alone, home alone. On one level, it was not a big deal, but after she had been gone for some time, it occurred to me to sample the homemade jelly that I had seen her put up high in a kitchen cabinet. So I moved a chair over and climbed up on the counter to reach the cabinet and had just managed to sample some of the jelly when I heard the squeak of the gate. She's back. I screwed the top back on, shut the cabinet, climbed down, pushed the chair across the room, and ran around the corner. And then I waited an eternity of 2 minutes while she put down her grocery bags, opened and closed the refrigerator, and then silence. And then I heard it, the dreaded double name. Not Gary, but Gary Joseph. Come here. I came sheepishly. What is this? Pointing to a red blob on the counter. I thought it was blood. And then she hit me with it. It? No, not a physical whack. She hit me softly with her words. I thought I could trust you. Nothing more. No spanking, no even sending to my room. Just 6 words and nothing more, and never said again, never referred to again. She didn't have to. She said it just that once. I thought I could trust you. Now, maybe that doesn't seem like an Adam and Eve story, but it stayed with me. It has stayed with me more than 60 years. Do you have such a memory, perhaps? Wait, how'd she know it was me and not my older brother? Mother's eyes, God's eyes. The astonishing thing about all of this, not the red jelly story, the Adam and Eve story, the astonishing thing is how God ultimately responds to that brokenness of the ones he had trusted. Not God's immediate response, which is understandable and which is punitive. This is the response we, taking God's side, the trustees' side, this we really do understand. We have experienced it, parents and employers and others, have you not? There is nothing surprising about God's initial response. What is surprising, astonishing, is God's long, slow, graceful, grace-filled, eternal response to human sin. In response to the heartbreak of that walk in the garden in the cool of the evening, God imagines into being a way for us to become what we were always intended to be. In response to our shame, God makes a way for us to stand freely in God's own presence, naked but unashamed and unafraid. And in order to ensure that things will go according to plan, God again risks walking among us. We call it the Incarnation. He walks again in the garden, a different garden, one with an olive press. And this time he walks for us as much as he walks with us through Gethsemane. God's astonishing response to human sin is to forgive, redeem, and save. All of us most certainly are and will remain the children of Adam and Eve. But another day comes when we again find ourselves wandering through the garden, considering something done or left undone, and God comes searching us out, walking to meet us in the coolness of that evening. And here's where the story changes, thanks to God. God calls our names. And instead of giving in to the urge to run and hide, we lift up our heads. We do not need to cover ourselves, but rather turn toward the sound of God's voice. And all because God met us at our worst and made a way for us to become our best, perhaps even to confidently respond, "Yes, Mother God, you can trust me. You can trust me." So, the question pertains, what will you do? What will you do with this precious gift of having been forgiven? Elsewhere, the gospel says, the gift you have been given, give as a gift. Withholding is for the IRS. Don't withhold your forgiveness. God, who walked in the garden in the coolness of an evening, God does not practice withholding and trusts you not to as well. Trust me, you don't want to hear those 6 words. I thought I could trust you. And the psalmist said, if you, Lord, were to note what is done amiss, Lord, who could stand? In the name of the Lord who walks in the garden with us in the coolness of the evening. Amen.